I'm sitting on a cold bench at the bus station. 3 in the morning. Not a soul around. Just the occasional drunk and homeless person who've long since learned not to notice each other. My bag sits beside me, in it a change of underwear, a toothbrush, and a pack of crackers I bought with my last $3. I'm 62 years old. I've lived in this city for 40 years. I raised a son, I worked 2 jobs, I paid a mortgage for 25 years. And now I'm sitting here because my only son, the one I gave birth to in agony, the one I gave everything to, kicked me out of my own apartment. And you know what the strangest thing is? I'm not angry at him. I'm angry at myself. Because I signed those papers myself. I believed his sweet talk myself. I closed my eyes to what I'd been seeing for years. This isn't his betrayal. It's my own stupidity. And today I want to tell you this story, not so you'll feel sorry for me, but so you'll understand. Sometimes the biggest losses are life's greatest gifts. Let's start from the very beginning. My name is Sarah. I'm not a heroine. I'm an ordinary woman who spent her whole life trying to be a good mother. I got married young, had David at 23. His father left when the boy was 5. He just packed his things and said, "I'm not cut out for family life," and disappeared. I was left alone, without money, without support, without hope. But I had David, a little boy with huge brown eyes who looked at me like I was the whole world. I swore to myself that I'd raise him so he'd never feel deprived, so he'd have everything I didn't. And I did it. I worked as a cleaner at night and as a shop assistant during the day. I slept 4 hours a night. I ate cheap pasta so I could buy him a new school backpack. I didn't buy myself clothes for years to send him to a good college. I denied myself everything. But I was happy because he was happy. The apartment he took from me was my pride and joy. I bought it in '97. Small, a 1-bedroom, but with a big window and a view of the park. I saved for it for 15 years. I took on side jobs, I economized on everything. I never went on vacation. But when I first stepped over the threshold, when I put the keys on the table, I cried with happiness. This was my home, my fortress, my victory over life. I renovated it with my own hands. I hung the wallpaper, laid the laminate, painted the ceiling. Every corner of that apartment was soaked in my sweat and tears. And David grew up there. He knew every crack, every scratch on the floor. It was his home. But he forgot that, or pretended to forget. It all started 2 years ago. David got married. His wife's name is Emily, a sweet girl, quiet, modest. I didn't accept her right away. She wasn't from our circle. Grew up in a small town. Parents divorced. She worked as a waitress. I thought he deserved better. I told him that. I shook my head when he brought her to our place for dinner. I thought she wasn't good enough for my boy. Now I realize how foolish I was. Emily turned out to be the only person who never betrayed me. But more on that later. After the wedding, David started to change. He started talking about money, about wanting more, about how his friends had already bought houses and drove expensive cars. He complained that his salary wasn't enough. And then he came to me with a proposal. He said, "Mom, I want to start a business. I have a great idea, but I need startup capital. I could take out a loan, but the interest is huge. What if you transferred the apartment to my name? I'll use it as collateral for the business, and once I start making money, I'll buy you a house twice as big by the sea. You've always dreamed of living by the sea, haven't you?" I looked at him and saw that little boy asking for a chocolate bar. He knew how to push the right buttons. He knew my weakness, my love for him. He knew I couldn't refuse him. I hesitated. Instinct screamed at me, "Don't do it." But I silenced that voice. I told myself, he's my son. He can't deceive me. He loves me. He just wants a better life. And I signed those papers. I didn't read them carefully. I trusted him. I signed the apartment over to his name. He promised it was temporary, that in a year I'd have a house by the sea. I even started browsing options online. I imagined sitting on the porch watching the sunset. I didn't imagine that a month later I'd be thrown out on the street like old furniture. I remember the day he came with the keys. He stood at the doorstep, his face tense. Emily stood beside him. She stared at the floor and wouldn't meet my eyes. David said, "Mom, I need you to move out. I'm selling the apartment. I found an investor who wants to buy it at a good price. I need the money right now. You can stay with a friend or somewhere else. Couldn't believe my ears. I asked, David, is this a joke? This is my apartment. I've lived here for 25 years. And he replied, no, Mom. This is my apartment. You signed the documents. Now it's my property. You have 2 weeks to pack your things. I stood there and looked at him. At the man I'd carried under my heart for 9 months. At the man I'd stayed up with through his sick nights. At the man for whom I'd sacrificed my youth, my health, my dreams. And he stood before me and told me I had to leave. I asked, what about the house by the sea? You promised. He smirked, Mom, you're an adult. You didn't really believe in fairy tales, did you? He turned and left. Emily looked up at me. I saw tears in her eyes. She wanted to say something, but she didn't dare. She ran out after him. I was alone. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the room and cried. I cried like I'd never cried before. Not even when my husband left, not even when my mother died. I cried from pain, from hurt, from humiliation. But worst of all, I cried from guilt. Because I had created this monster myself. I raised him, indulged him. I never taught him gratitude. I taught him to take. And now he'd taken everything. He'd taken my apartment, my security, my faith in the future. He'd left me with nothing. And in that moment, I realized one terrible thing. I'd never truly known my son. I'd loved an image I'd invented. But he was what he was. An egotist who used everyone who loved him. But I wasn't going to give up. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, drinking cold tea and thinking. I thought about how I'd ended up here. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself, what do you want, Sarah? Not for David. For yourself. And I couldn't find an answer, because I'd always lived for him. My desires were always second. I'd become my son's shadow, and that was my biggest mistake. The next day I started packing. It was painful, touching every book, every photograph. Every item had meaning. I picked up the album with his childhood photos and wanted to throw it away. But I couldn't. I stuffed everything into bags. I packed 2 bags. All that was left of 25 years of life. I called my friend Martha and asked if I could stay with her for a couple of weeks. She said, come over, Sarah, of course. You're always welcome here. And I went. I left my apartment, my home, my life. I left with the hope that someday I'd get it all back. But I didn't know how. In those days, I felt broken. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I lay on Martha's sofa and stared at the ceiling. I thought about suicide. It would be so simple, jump off a bridge and all the suffering would end. But something stopped me. Maybe survival instinct. Or maybe that small spark of pride still flickering inside me. I told myself, you can't die. You have to show him he was wrong. You have to prove you're not just a victim. You're a mother who made a mistake but is ready to fix it. I decided to fight. Not for the apartment. For myself. I started looking for information. I went to the library because I had no internet access. I read books on legal matters. I studied property and fraud laws. I learned that there are cases where a contract can be challenged if it was signed under deception or duress. It was a straw, but I grabbed it. I went to a senior citizens help center. They gave me contact information for a lawyer who worked pro bono. I met with him. His name was Mr. Stevens. He listened to me, looked through my documents and said, you have a chance, but you need evidence. You need to prove that your son intentionally misled you. I had nothing, just my word against his. But I didn't give up. I started gathering evidence. I found old messages where David had written that this was temporary. I recorded a conversation we had in the kitchen. I did it quietly without picking up the phone. I just turned on the voice recorder on my phone and slipped it in my pocket. And when he came again to rush me out, I asked him, David, you promised me a house by the sea, remember? He said, Mom, are you serious? Don't be so naive. You think I'd do anything for you? I've always only thought about myself. You're just too stupid to understand that. I recorded it. Those words became my weapon. I filed a lawsuit. David was furious. He came to my work. I'd gotten a job as a cleaner at a cafe, and yelled that I was ruining his life, that I was a bitter old hag trying to destroy his future. I looked at him and said nothing. I didn't answer, because I knew now I had a lawyer, a recording, a chance. My son didn't know I'd recorded his confession. He was sure he could intimidate me. He didn't understand that the mother he'd thrown out on the street was no longer that naive woman. She'd become a warrior. The judge set a hearing date. I was terrified. I was afraid I'd lose, that he'd be smarter than me, that he had his own lawyers, that he'd twist everything in his favor. I prayed. I asked for help from higher powers. And then a miracle happened. One I couldn't have even dreamed of. On the day of the hearing, while David sat confidently on the defendant's bench, his wife Emily rose from her seat. She walked up to the judge and said, "I want to testify." David went pale. He shouted, "Emily, don't you dare. You don't know anything." But she didn't stop. She looked at me, at my son, and began to speak. She said that David had been planning this deception for 6 months before I signed the papers. She showed his notes, his messages where he wrote to his friends. "The old lady will give me everything if I tell her I love her." She revealed that he'd already tried to defraud his own grandmother. She spoke calmly, clearly, with a dignity I'd never noticed in her before. I sat and cried. I cried because this girl, whom I'd looked down on, turned out to be my guardian angel. The judge reviewed my evidence and ruled in my favor. The apartment was returned to me. David was ordered to pay all court costs. I won. But I didn't just win back the apartment. I won self-respect. I won a new family. Because Emily, my daughter-in-law, became my daughter. She left David that very evening. She said, "I can't live with a man who betrayed his own mother." She came to me, hugged me, and said, "Sarah, you'll be my mother, if you'll let me." I hugged her and broke down. I was no longer crying from pain. I was crying from happiness. I lost a son. I realized that the person I'd raised was gone. Or maybe he'd never existed at all. But I gained a daughter. And you know what the most amazing thing is? I'm grateful to David. If he hadn't betrayed me, I would never have woken up. I would have kept living as his shadow. But now I live for myself. And for Emily. We started a small business together. We bake cakes to order. I finally bought myself new dresses. I signed up for dance classes. I meet up with friends. And every evening I sit in the kitchen and look at my apartment. Not as a dwelling, but as a symbol of my struggle. I didn't become a victim. I became a winner. I don't know what lies ahead. But I know I will never again let any man dictate my life. Even if that man is my own son. I learned to say no. I learned to value myself. And I want to say to everyone listening right now, if you feel like you're being used, like your feelings are being toyed with, like you're not valued, stop. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, "I am not a victim. I am a strong person. And if I, an old woman who spent her whole life as a shadow, could change my life, then so can you." Believe in yourself. Fight for yourself. And never let anyone take your dignity. Because your life is not someone else's project. It's your own unique journey. Thank you for being with me. If the story resonated with you, hit that like button. It lets me know I'm saying the right things. Drop a comment. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone close? And of course, subscribe. We'll meet again. I want to share stories that help us all grow stronger. Until next time.